has not dealt seriously with the criticism of capitalism in 50 years. I once had a graduate student, I said, go read the congressional record, the literal record of every debate in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and find me a debate over the pros and cons of capitalism. Couldn't find it. We have not allowed a political leader, we have not allowed economics as a profession, which is my profession, to have people like me. Let me be real personal and honest. I'm a professor. I've been a professor all my life in the United States, despite my criticisms. And that's because I'm like a game player. When I'm in trouble and I need help, I wave my pedigrees. You all know what I mean. I went to the right schools, so I'm in the club. Even though I say strange things, I'm critical. That's sad. And our country and our society are weaker because we do not have a tradition of critical thinking, which we badly need in a system that's working as poorly as the current one is and is likely to continue. Those of you who remember what I said, that the average in the history of capitalism is 4 to 7 years since the last downturn. Our major downturn was in 2008 and 2009. Now you do the addition, 4 to 7 years, we're due for one. And Wall Street waits one. You think we have trouble in the United States with Trump now? Make Trump plus a recession over the next 12 months and try to ask the question again. This is a system whose instability rocks it. And yes, I think education that would open people to the enormous and productive and sophisticated literature that explores these critical perspectives would be an enormous contribution to solving the problems.
Thank you for your talk. I find it very refreshing because I'm from China. And 6 years ago when I came to the United States, I really hated my country's system. Now that I look back and see the great achievement that my country has made, I find that, probably there's some problem in the United States or in the Western world in general, which is, those capitalistic countries have great economic systems, but the political system is really backward or it hasn't been updated regularly. And you can see this from the amount of debts that the United States has. I think it's like $9 trillion US. In China, we have $4 trillion US in people's savings as of now. So the economy is really booming. But what I find in your talk is your perspective is a little bit too extreme. It's definitely, I think what my country did well was we find a really good balance point between efficiency and equality. Actually, those two are two different forces. So if you have better efficiency, it's really hard to get equality. So my question is, how would you suggest the current, in the current states, you have this government, you have this political system in your hand. How would you suggest those people who make those decisions to move forward into a more of an appropriate point where equality meets efficiency? And if any one of you, if you haven't been to China, please go there, and it's an amazing world. I wonder if you have ever been to China.
Not yet.
Okay, I think it's a right time to visit China.
Okay, let me
right now.
Let me respond. Some facts and then an interpretation of what's happening in your country. Facts do underscore what you have said. For example, the real wage in the United States has been stagnant now for 35 years. Let me drive home what that is so you all understand. Real wage in economics is a very simple measure. You take the amount of money a person gets on average and you adjust it for the prices that the person has to pay, because obviously if you get 10% more wages, but all the prices go up 10%, you're not better off. You can't buy any more with your extra 10% of money than you could before because the prices have gone up. The term real wage takes that into account. So it measures what you really can buy with whatever the wages are that you get. When you do that, the American real wage over the last 35 years is the same. I'm going to be starker with you. Real wages in the United States are the same today they were late in the 1970s. The only reason Americans have been able to consume a rising amount in the last 70 years is because of two things they did. And for those of you who don't know, this is your life I'm talking about. Number one, a vast social change happened. And it is about women, particularly white in our country, white women who have left in the millions lives as homemakers, wives, mothers, and so on, and become members of the paid labor force. So much so that your generation, I would guess, simply assumes it. But that's new. That's how the family had enough money to sustain the illusion that they were participating in the American dream. Because every household, every married couple now had a second major money earner. But it turned out it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough because when mother or wife went out to work in massive numbers, she needed her own outfit for that. She needed a second car because we don't do public transportation in this country. It's against our religion and so on. That was an attempt at humor there, what I just did. Okay. So the second thing American working class did to sustain the illusion was, you all know, debt. We borrow for our house, we borrow for our car, we borrow for the credit card, and in a stunning innovation of American capitalism over the last 25 years, we borrow to send our children to college, producing a level of indebtedness that is explosive, and which explains part of why we crashed in 2008 and why it is taking so long to recover. We can't handle our economic system. By contrast, real wages in China have increased many times over the last 20 years. There's no comparison. The working class standard of living in China is zooming by comparison to here. China's GDP grows in the neighborhood of 6 to 9, depending on how you count, percent a year. We're lucky if we get 2 to 3% year after year. That's why the two economies are getting closer and closer, because we're slow and they're fast. Now, you can pretend all you want, and boy, Americans are good at that, but that's the reality. And somewhere you have to deal with that. Number 2 point in response. China is taking advantage, understandably, of something much bigger than China. There is a decision made in the centers of capitalism that the places in the world where capitalism was born and grew to its modern power, and those places are Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Those places, as capitalism grew in these areas where it first got going and became big, and that's where it put its industry, that's where it put its warehouses, that's where it's put its offices and its stores. It's what you all know. You're living in New York. But along the way, it had to come to terms with the working class, and what it did was offer them higher wages. And so the wages here rose. Not as fast as the profits, but they rose to keep the system going. Because the inequality, if you let it get too much, blows the system up. So a point was reached around the 1970s when something happened to change everything. American capitalists looked at their working class, paying them the kinds of salaries that enable the American working class to have the standard of living it enjoys. But they also discovered in the 1970s the jet engine and modern telecommunications. And suddenly something was possible that had never been possible before for corporations, capitalists, to say to themselves the following: why the hell are we in the United States or Britain or France or Japan? We can now supervise production in a factory in China or India or Brazil with modern telecommunications as easily as we could before supervise the factory across the street. And we can fly anywhere in the world in a matter of hours. So our managers can. We don't need the American working class, whom we overpay. And we're out of here. We're leaving. Capitalism, over the last 40 years, has abandoned the countries in which it was born and reached its maturity. And where did it go? To the countries in the world that gave the greatest reason to bring them. China, number one. A disciplined working class, a pretty well-educated working class, a politically controlled working class, and a cheap working class by comparison to the West. And of course, the capitalists maximizing profit, because that's what this system works with. They went. They're still going in massive numbers. China is where capitalism is succeeding. And we here in America are facing a very, very traumatic problem. Our capitalism is declining. There are pockets that are not. Google's probably one of them. But the larger society in which Google too has to survive is a society that is experiencing cutbacks of job opportunity, cutbacks of income, cutbacks of government services everywhere. Western Europe, North America, and Japan. The political implications, we're just at the beginning of understanding, but it's going to traumatize and trouble all of our lives for the rest of our lives. China is where capitalism is new, where it's going, where it's growing. We live in a part of the world of capitalism where it isn't, and that we are not prepared for, because that no one has prepared the American people or the people of Western Europe or Japan, which is why the trauma of politics is becoming so turbulent, as this is slowly dawning on people. And they look to blame somebody. A favorite one is, of course, immigrants. Let's pretend it's all them who somehow are to blame. We'll just kick them out. It won't solve anything. We'll kick out the old politicians and bring in Mr. Trump. Doesn't solve anything either. Dump Mr. Trump, that won't solve anything either. Because you're not dealing with what the underlying realities are that have provoked all of this situation. But I do believe that China is mostly the beneficiary of the transformation of capitalism, and will suffer. It's already suffering, but will suffer as capitalism moves its center to those parts of the world. It brings with it all of the history of turbulent class struggles that we know from what happened in Western Europe, North America, and Japan. So I would be a little more cautious about the future of Japan, but without denying that they are where capitalism is ebullient, where capitalism is growing. We aren't. We only sustained the illusion the last 40 years by having women go to work and borrowing like there's no tomorrow. But you don't need an advanced degree in economics to understand if the wages are flat, the real wage that American working class has, while it borrows more and more, a day will come when you don't have enough wealth to service the debt, to pay it off. And when that happens, it crashes. And that's what 2008 was. If capitalism was what's coming to China, as I believe it is, both Chinese and foreign, then the instabilities and inequalities of capitalism everywhere else will descend upon China too. Just a footnote. Last year, there were more new millionaires in China than there were in the United States. It's in a country that's much poorer than the United States. You got to wonder, where does that go? But that's the typical story of capitalism.
I'm sorry, we don't have